Okay, this is chapter 3 of Chasing Lincoln's Killer. I don't know why I had to look at the title. Forgot the name of the book for a second. I need to preface this part, okay? So, one of your questions this week deals with 2 other people that Booth wanted assassinated that night. One was Andrew Johnson, the vice president, and one was Secretary of State William Seward. So I want you to figure out why they would want to assassinate those other 2 people. It has to do with the Constitution, with what would happen after President Lincoln died. So that's kind of a hint to help you with that. Chapter 3 is about the assassination attempt on William Seward. It was kind of a violent attempt. This is a kid's book, so it's not like super specific, but it's a little bit more graphic than President Lincoln. So just so you're aware. So chapter 3. Less than a mile away near the White House all was quiet at the home of Secretary of State William H. Seward. Confined to his bed since a terrible carriage accident the week before, Seward drifted in and out of consciousness. The night of the accident, Seward's face swelled so badly that his children could barely recognize him, and the blood pouring through his nose almost suffocated him. Seward's doctors warned the family to keep him under constant watch. So this is from the carriage accident. 4 days after the carriage accident, Lincoln walked from the White House to Seward's big brick mansion nearby to check on Seward. The accident worried Lincoln. Carriage accidents were serious in wartime Washington and could prove deadly. The sight of Seward alive, if not well, relieved Lincoln. During the war, Lincoln and Seward had become good friends and trusted confidants. After talking quietly for an hour, Lincoln left and never saw Seward again. Now, on April 14th, Fanny Seward, she's in your character list, watched over her father and listened to the sights and sounds of celebrations in the streets. A torchlight parade marched to the White House. A band played patriotic songs. Fanny was a tall, slender, brown-haired girl, educated in literature and politics, and, at age 20, her father's favorite. A devoted and talented writer with an eye for detail, her secret diary, which she began at 14, detailed her observations and encounters with political, military, and diplomatic elite. Outside the mansion, in the shadows, Lewis Powell and David Harold were keeping the Seward house under close watch. The street was quiet. They saw no guards at the front door or anywhere on the street. The newspapers reported Seward's carriage accident and described the serious injuries he had suffered, noting that he was recovering at home, bedridden. That made Seward and all of Lincoln's cabinet officers Booth's most appealing target tonight. The other cabinet officers could be anywhere, dinner parties, traveling, and would be difficult to track. Seward, helplessly lying in bed, was sure to be home when the assassins arrived. Booth issued simple instructions to his henchmen: invade the house, locate the Secretary of State's bedroom, and kill the defenseless victim with pistol fire and, if necessary, a knife. This was a difficult mission even for a man like Powell, a battle-hardened and extremely strong Confederate soldier. Powell had 3 problems. First, how was he to enter the house? The door was surely locked. He would have to ring the bell. If someone answered, he could just shoot and slash his way in. That might attract the attention of pedestrians or awaken the occupants of the house to defend themselves. Deception, not brute force, was the key. They came up with a brilliant plan. Powell would pretend he was a messenger delivering important medicine from Seward's doctor. To make his story more believable, Powell carried a small package wrapped in paper and tied with a string. Powell's second problem was that he would have to track down Secretary Seward himself, not just deliver the package to a servant or nurse. How could he find him in the large 3-story mansion? Powell's third challenge: how many people were in the house? Seward might be attended by nurses, doctors, servants, maids, family members, and guards. There were certainly several people there, perhaps up to a dozen. Powell, fiercely loyal to Booth, ignored the risk and agreed to proceed with the plan. David Harold also went along, as long as he did not have to kill anybody and could wait for Powell outside holding their horses. From the shadows, Powell and Harold watched Seward's doctors leave. The house was quiet now. They watched the gaslights go dim in several rooms, indicating that the occupants were settling in for the night. Powell handed his horse to Harold and walked across the street to the secretary's front door. He rang the bell. Heralds scanned up and down the block as he stood watch, keeping their horses ready. On the first floor of the house, a black servant named William Bell hurried to answer the door. Late-night callers, mostly messengers, were not unusual. There was no reason why the servants should not open the door. Before him stood a tall, attractive, muscular man, well-dressed in fine leather boots, black pants, jacket, and hat. He was holding a small package in his hands. The deception had worked. Nothing about Powell's appearance raised suspicion in William Bell. He greeted Powell and asked politely how he could help the visitor. Powell explained his mission. He was a messenger with medicine from Seward's doctor. That sounded reasonable. The servant reasoned the doctor must have prescribed some medicine and ordered it to be delivered to Seward immediately. Powell stepped into the hall and closed the door behind him. Bell reached out and accepted the package. No, Powell said. The doctor said he had to deliver it personally to the Secretary of State and instruct him how to take the medicine. The servant said he would take the delivery up himself. Powell insisted, "I must go up." He must see the secretary personally. Those were his instructions. For 5 minutes, the assassin and the servant argued about whether Powell would leave the medicine with Bell. "I must go up," he repeated. "I must go up." Powell inched toward the staircase, backing Bell up the landing. The servant was in grave danger now. Powell was almost out of patience. Powell lifted a foot for the first step, then another to the second. Bell chattered on, but Powell kept pounding up the stairs slowly, his boots striking the steps with dull thuds that echoed to the floors above. Luckily for Bell, he did not try to block Powell's path. Instead, he climbed the stairs with him. At the top of the staircase, Seward's son Frederick confronted Bell and the stranger. Powell did not know it, but Frederick stood only a few feet from the closed door to the room where Secretary Seward lay. The stranger explained his mission. Frederick explained that his father was asleep and that he would take the delivery of medicine for him. Again, Powell refused, arguing that he must see the secretary. Incredibly, Powell, thanks to the little package he showed as a prop, still had not created suspicion about his true intentions. To Frederick, he seemed like a stupid and stubborn messenger. From inside his father's bedroom, Fanny Seward sensed someone was in the hall. She hurried to the door and opened it, only a little to shield her father from the bright gaslight from the hallway. She saw her brother and the tall stranger in the hat and overcoat. She whispered, "Fred, father is awake now." She knew in an instant she had done wrong. Powell leaned forward and tried to peek into the dark room, but Fanny held the door closed and the assassin was not able to see his target. He stared at Fanny in a harsh and impatient tone, demanded, "Is the secretary asleep?" Then Fanny made a terrible mistake. She glanced back into the room in the direction of her father and repeated, "Almost." Frederick Seward grabbed the door and shut it quickly. It was too late. Innocently, Fanny had given Powell the information he desperately needed. Secretary of State William H. Seward was in that room, lying helpless in bed, defended by no one. Powell probably assumed, but a frail-looking girl. Powell did not know that Sergeant Robinson was in the bedroom too. So I'm going to flip around here and give you some pictures. So this is Powell right here that we're talking about. This is Fanny and William Seward. And this is David Harold, who's the guy that's waiting outside, who said he would help but didn't want to kill anybody. So just so you can kind of see who we're talking about. So it was too late. Innocently, Fanny had given Powell the information. Oh, sorry. I just read that. Robinson, a wounded veteran, was serving as an army nurse, keeping watch over Seward as he recovered. Frederick, still arguing with Powell, gave him an order: surrender the medicine or take it back to the doctor. Powell glared, still refusing to give up his package. He finally pretended to give up, stuffed the package in his pocket, turned around and started to walk down the stairs. He did not remove his hand from his pocket. William Bell, walking down ahead of Powell, looked ahead to the front door, through which in a few moments he would take the ill-mannered visitor into the street. At the top of the stairs, Frederick Seward, satisfied at turning away an annoying pest, took his eyes off Powell and headed for his room. In an instant, Powell turned and rushed up the stairs. Before Frederick could turn around, Powell stood behind him. Seward whirled around, but too late. Powell was pointing a revolver at him. the muzzle inches from his face. In another moment, a .36 caliber bullet would explode in his face, and the hot black powder would, at such close range, not only kill him instantly, but also burn his flesh a hideous black. Powell, staring into Frederick's eyes, squeezed the trigger. The hammer fell and struck the percussion cup. Seward had no time to move. He knew he was dead. Then he heard a metallic click. Misfire. The gun had not fired off its round. Frederick was still alive, but Powell, unlike his master Booth, had 5 more rounds in his revolver. He could draw the hammer back with his thumb and take another shot. Then Powell made a mistake that jeopardized his mission. Instead of trying to fire again, Powell raised the pistol high in the air and brought it down, a crushing blow, to Frederick's head. He hit him so hard he broke the pistol, jamming the cylinder and making it impossible to fire the weapon again. In a fury, using all his strength, Powell clubbed Frederick Seward with the barrel of the broken revolver. William Bell ran down the stairs and into the streets, shouting, "Murder!" Watching from across the street, nervous David Harold knew he was not part of the plan. This was not part of the plan. Fanny, unaware of the chaos at the other side of the door, sat in the chair beside her father. She heard the sound of Frederick being beaten and wondered what was the noise in the hallway. As soon as Sergeant Robinson opened the door, Fanny saw a horrible sight. Her brother's face, wild-eyed, covered with blood. Powell, moving quickly, he shoved Frederick aside and struck Sergeant Robinson in the forehead hard with the knife, stunning him with the blow. So this is another picture published in a magazine of the confrontation between Powell and Frederick Seward. So that's him climbing up the stairs right there. Okay. The assassin pushed past the stumbling sergeant and the frail girl blocking his path. He ran to Secretary Seward's bed, clutching the knife in his right hand and the pistol in his left. In near darkness, Fanny raced Powell to her father's bed, trying in vain to throw her slender body between the huge assassin and her helpless father. The assassin reached the bed and pounced on Seward. "Don't kill him," she shouted. Seward awoke, trying weakly to raise himself. He saw Fanny, then glimpsed Powell's unforgettable, rugged face and burning eyes. The assassin pushed hard on the secretary's chest, pinning him to the bed. Powell used every ounce of strength he had to land a tremendous blow, but in the dark missed twice. Determined not to miss again, he delivered a third mighty blow, aimed at Seward's throat. The agonized groan came from the bed, told Powell that he'd finally hit his target. The blade slashed open Seward's cheek so viciously that the skin hung from a flap, exposing his teeth and fractured jawbone. His cheek resembled a fish gill. Seward choked on the warm, metallic-tasting blood that spurted from his mouth and poured down his throat. Across the room, Sergeant Robinson regained his senses. He would fight to the death before he allowed the assassin to murder the secretary and Miss Fanny. He charged toward Powell. In an instant, the 2 battle-hardened Civil War veterans grappled in a death struggle. Powell's strength surprised Robinson. He could barely hold on to him as Powell went for Seward again. Fanny screamed in an endless, howling, terrifying wail that woke her brother Augustus, who was sleeping in a room nearby. She opened the window and screamed into the street below. That was enough to frighten David Harold into fleeing. He kicked the horse and fled, abandoning Lewis Powell. Powell kept fighting. Powell's experience as a soldier would not permit one man and a screaming girl to scare him off. Augustus Seward, dressed in his nightshirt, raced into his father's room and saw the shadows of 2 men fighting. Confused, he thought his father had become delirious with the male nurse, Sergeant Robinson, and the male nurse, Sergeant Robinson, was trying to restrain him. As soon as he grabbed the shadowy figure he thought was his father, he knew it was someone else. Now combating 2 men, Powell fought harder, slashing wildly with the knife. He stabbed Robinson twice in the shoulder, deeply and to the bone. Robinson ignored the wounds and kept fighting. The sergeant and Augustus wrestled Powell into the hall and into the bright gaslight. Powell and Augustus, their faces inches apart, fixed their eyes on each other. Then Powell spoke. In an intense but calm voice, the assassin confided to Augustus, as though trying to persuade him of the strangest thing. "I'm mad. I'm mad." Powell wound his arm around Robinson's neck in a chokehold, and the sergeant braced himself for the knife that was sure to follow any moment. Then, in a curious act of mercy, Powell let him go and instead of stabbing him, hit him with his fist. Powell fled down the stairs and out into the street, his eyes searching desperately for David Harold. He found nothing more than his lone horse. Powell tossed his knife to the ground, mounted his horse, and instead of galloping into the night, calmly trotted away. William Bell, waving his arms in the street, pursued Powell on foot for a few blocks, yelling all the way. Unable to keep up with the horse, he gave up and returned to the Seward house. Fanny ran back to her father's room, only to find the bed empty. She saw what she thought was no more than a pile of discarded bed sheets on the floor, but it was her father, in a bloody heap. To save his own life, he had rolled out of bed during the attack and crashed to the floor, hoping to escape Powell's reach in the dark room. Fanny slipped on a puddle of blood and tumbled to the floor beside her father. He looked ghastly white and very thin, and that made her scream mistakenly, "Oh God, my father's dead." Sergeant Robinson ignored his own wounds, lifted the injured Seward from the floor, and laid him tenderly in bed. Seward opened his eyes, looked up at his terrified daughter, and in unimaginable pain spit the blood out of his mouth and whispered, "I'm not dead. Send for the doctor. Send for police. Close the house." So, here are pictures that were put in the National Police Gazette, which it's hard to read, but it's hard to, this is images from that night. It says, it was the April 22nd issue of the National Police Gazette, portrays scenes from what it calls the Assassin's Carnival. And there's the assassination of President Lincoln and the attempted assassination of Seward. So you've got like Lincoln laying in bed. You've got the fight going on. All of that craziness. Ridiculous. Like, can you imagine having to do that for a newspaper? So, anyway, I want to touch base one more thing. You have the characters chart. So Lincoln, obviously our president, give some description about him. Grant was the Union general. Booth is our assassin. Leal, he was at the play that night. Remember, he was the doctor. He's going to be very important soon. Andrew Johnson was the vice president. You've got Mary Surratt. Give some description about how she helped Booth. We talked about her when we read about her. Major Rathburn and Clara Harris were at the play with President Lincoln. Give some description about how they helped. Then you have William Seward, who's the Secretary of State. Fanny Seward, his daughter. William Bell, his servant. And Sergeant Robinson, who was his male nurse. So if you can give some description about what they did. And we're going to add to that list again next week as we go through more chapters. So if you have any questions about anything, I know it's a little bit awkward to listen to me read them to you, but we'll figure this thing out. Okay? Have a great week.